Hello, fighting game fans, and welcome to another episode of Build the Roster, the show where we take a hypothetical fighting game and build our dream roster around it. But this isn't any ordinary episode, Build the Roster. This is our anniversary episode. Our very first episode premiered in April of 2020, and it was all about our dream roster for a new Marvel vs. Capcom game. And while that roster could certainly use an update, it did start tradition, where every single year we would do an anniversary episode tackling a brand new hypothetical Capcom crossover. But this year, we're getting as hypothetical as possible, because we're not looking at a possible future game today. No, instead, we're looking back to the past. We're looking throughout Capcom's history at all of its influential franchises, but we're also looking at another fighting game franchise, one that has deep ties to Capcom while being made by one of its competitors. And we're asking, what if things had gone a little bit differently? Welcome back to a new episode of Build the Roster, and as I mentioned, this is our anniversary episode, so I want to take a moment to thank everyone who has tuned in over the years, has supported the show and spread around. When we started this crazy idea of a fighting game show where we just geek out about rosters, I had no idea it would be as popular as it is today. Thank you all so much for tuning in and subscribing and commenting and sharing and everything else. And speaking of that, if you haven't subscribed yet, it's the year of 100,000 subs. We're aiming to hit 100K by the end of the year, so if you haven't subscribed yet and you want to help us out, go ahead and hit that button down there. I'd appreciate it, and I thank you in advance. Also, one last thank you to all of our patrons over at patreon.com/ThorgiesArcade. They actually voted on what our anniversary episode would be this year, so if you want to join them to get behind the scenes updates and vote on future videos, then follow the link in the description down below. But what subject did they vote on? Weird you would ask that question since it's on the thumbnail, but no problem, I got you. You see, on this channel, we've talked about a lot of different fighting games over the years, but two that we have come back to the most are Street Fighter and King of Fighters. Street Fighter is the franchise that defined the fighting game genre and caused it to explode back in the 90s. And King of Fighters would go on to be famous for its huge cast of characters, ongoing stories, and unique format of each player picking a team of 3 characters. However, despite being made by completely different companies, these two titles share something very large in common. Takashi Nishiyama. This is the developer who created the original Street Fighter. Okay, yes, he didn't invent Street Fighter 2, the game that everyone remembers, but he did come up with the original title back in 1987. Then he left Capcom to go and join SNK, where he would create Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, and King of Fighters. So today, we're asking the question, what if things had worked out differently? Let's say that Takashi Nishiyama never left for SNK, and instead, he pitched the idea for King of Fighters to Capcom, and they decided to run with it, and it became Capcom's biggest fighting game franchise. Also, before we go any further, hey, Editing Thorgy here, jumping in with a real quick addition. I would like to remind everyone that this subject was voted on by the patrons, and they voted on it months ago. So the fact that just a week ago an announcement was made that several SNK characters would be coming to Street Fighter, that had no impact on this. I was already halfway through editing this thing when that announcement got made, so none of this was planned. It's just probably the craziest timing of anything that's ever happened on this channel. But back to the actual subject at hand. Yes, today we are going to be building the roster for Capcom's own version of King of Fighters. What does this mean? Well, King of Fighters is a crossover game taking characters from multiple SNK properties, and each of them are put together onto 3-person teams. So, that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to create a Capcom crossover fighting game, but every character has to fit onto a team of 3. And the only rule I have for this show today is that these characters all have to be existing Capcom characters. I know that sounds obvious, but King of Fighters created tons of original characters over the years, so since the premise of this episode is what if Capcom had made King of Fighters, you might expect the original King of Fighters characters like Kyo and Iori and all the Orochi and Ness builds to show up in here. But no, we're not going to do that simply because, well, then I'm just listing off King of Fighters characters in a King of Fighters video. That's not really much of a challenge. No, the challenge for today's episode is to see what Capcom characters we can put together into 3-person teams and how many Capcom characters we can bring together under this format. So, with that being said, let's jump into the roster. Wait, really? That's it? I've only been talking for like 4 minutes, that's not right. I'm normally way more long-winded than this. Huh. Well, I guess that means we got a little extra time to kill today. How are you guys doing? Seen any good movies lately? Saw that new Godzilla film. That was actually pretty good. Maybe we should do a Godzilla builder roster someday. Wait! It just hit me. Since this is a special anniversary episode, and we got a little extra time to kill, what do you say before we get to the main roster, we do a second bonus roster? That's right, folks. KOF has had over a dozen installments over the course of 30 years, and its changing roster has largely reflected the growth and changes of SNK itself. So, why shouldn't we do the same for the Capcom KOF? So today, we're going to build the roster for a modern-day version of a Capcom King of Fighters game. But before we get to that, I said the premise of today's video is, what if Capcom made KOF? So let's really run with that. The original KOF came out in 1994 with 24 characters, 8 teams of 3. So let's hop into our way back machines, grab your slap-on bracelets, your cranberry CDs, and your flannel, well, everything, and let's build the roster 90s style. So, it's 1994, and you just found out that Crystal Pepsi has been discontinued, so you go to the arcade to take out your frustrations on the latest fighting game, and there you see Capcom's latest breakthrough, a crossover between all their various franchises with everyone being put on 3-person teams. But who is on this roster? Well, as I said, the original King of Fighters had 24 characters, 8 teams of 3. So that's what we're going to go with for this video. Although I will admit, I'm not going to spend as much time on these teams as I normally do in one of our builder rosters, partly because the real me of today's episode is going to be talking about the modern day version of a Capcom KOF, but also because, well, let's just say it was a very different time for Capcom back in 1994. There was no Devil May Cry, no Monster Hunter, like 80% of all their fighting games didn't exist yet, even Resident Evil wasn't around back then. So yeah, I'll admit, my choices are way slimmer for this roster than I expected when I decided to throw this into this episode. But hey, just because you don't have a lot of ingredients doesn't mean you can't cook up something special. So let's jump into our first team with Team World Warriors. If you saw our Capcom vs SNK 3 video a few years back, this one won't be a big surprise to you. Street Fighter in 1994 wasn't just the biggest fighting game in the world, it was also Capcom's biggest franchise. So if we're going to make a crossover fighting game just using Capcom characters, you have to have a team dedicated entirely to Street Fighter. And out of all the characters to make up this team, Ryu and Ken are the obvious two choices. Ryu is the face of the series, Ken is his best friend and rival, and at this point, their movesets were still 9% exactly the same, so at a time when 24 characters in a roster would be pushing things, having two characters share a moveset would definitely help. But as for the third character, Chun-Li just makes sense. She's easily one of, if not the largest face of the franchise. Although I will admit I had to second guess this because if you've seen our Street Fighter retrospective, you know when Street Fighter 2 was coming out, they clearly did not expect her to get as big as she did. But by 1994, I think it was clear she was a massive star. So yeah, let's put these three together, and seeing as how Street Fighter was so important for Capcom, let's not stop with just one team. Team New Challengers. Street Fighter 2 New Challengers came out in 1993, introducing 4 brand new characters to the roster. So I could totally see Capcom putting them together into one team. It would take advantage of the current hot new faces of the series, while helping to promote their upcoming new Super Turbo game at the exact same time. But as for who to put on this team, well, Cammy was easily the most popular new addition. And I could see Fei Long being the second most popular, but T-Hawk and DJ were pretty even back in the day, so I had to choose between the two of them, and while it would later be established in Street Fighter that DJ and Fei Long are friends, so it would make sense for the two of them to be on a team together, that wouldn't get set up for years down the road. However, if you saw our Street Fighter retrospective, sorry for bringing that up twice, I swear I'm not trying to advertise it and shove it in your face, it just is kind of important to what I'm talking about. But if you saw our Street Fighter retrospective, then you know that DJ was the only new challenger not made by Capcom Japan. He was made by someone from the American team. So, considering that Cammy, Fei Long, and T-Hawk were all made by the same division, the division that would be putting this game together, I imagine they're the three who they'd probably pick. Team Shadowloo. Okay, one last Street Fighter team to clear out before we start getting to some more variety. There should be a villain team in this game, and luckily Street Fighter already has a 3-person villain team ready to go. M. Bison had 3 henchmen who you had to fight through before you could challenge the big boss, so let's just put all 3 of them together on a team. I know some people would argue that Bison should be on this team as well, but it's already a 3-character setup just ready to go, it just makes sense. Plus, in the actual KOF games, it took a while before the bosses from the other games started to show up in that franchise, so I could see Bison sitting out the first couple of installments. Team Metro City. We can now move on past Street Fighter and get into some new teams which are still heavily connected to Street Fighter. Yeah, sorry, I know, but we're talking about Capcom 3-person teams. You have to include the classic. Final Fight was a massive hit for Capcom, and it dropped right when beat-em-up games were exploding in popularity. In the nation of beat-em-upistan, Mike Hagar's face is on the $1 bill. So of course, we have to turn Cody, Guy, and Hagar into a team for this game. Plus, they'd be one of the most well-balanced teams in the game. You got Guy as your speedy, agile rushdown character, Hagar as your big, tanky grappler, and Cody as an all-rounder right there between the two of them. It's like these 3 characters were designed specifically with this format in mind. Team 20XX. Okay, now we're getting a little bit further out there. Let's make a Mega Man team. It was arguably Capcom's biggest, or at least second biggest, franchise at this point in time. So, even if it's not a fighting game, you know we would have to give them a team in this big Capcom crossover. And I know it might seem odd to get some future robots in here, but remember, KOF is set outside of the continuity of all the games that's crossing over. So, we could say that in whatever timeline this KOF game is set in, Dr. Light exists in the modern day world. and he built these 3 robots in the present day. I mean, Capcom has always loved putting little Easter eggs in their games that imply different franchises have counterparts that exist within their other games, whether it be Strider Hiryu and human Darkstalkers hanging out on Ken's yacht, or Dr. Light and Dr. Wily being on posters in Raccoon City. So yeah, just have a modern day version of Mega Man. Or if that doesn't feel right, well, it's not like KOF hasn't had time travel in it before, so we can just have them be characters from the future. As for the team itself, obviously Mega Man would be in there, as well as Proto Man, who at this point in time was a well-established ally of the Blue Bomber. And then let's throw in Roll. At this point, she hadn't shown off any of her fighting abilities in the Mega Man games, but she would later go on to be in the Versus games, both of the Marvel and Tatsunoko variety. So I can totally see them including her. Team Night Warriors. I know making a Darkstalkers team seems really obvious. It was Capcom's second most successful first-party fighting game series. Of course they have to be in a fighting game crossover. However, this game is coming out in 1994. And Darkstalkers also came out in 1994. Meaning they just barely got in under the wire. It also means we're working off of the original Darkstalkers lineup here, so there's a lot more popular characters who were introduced later on who can't be in this game. But that also means a lot of the story that would play out over the course of the Darkstalker games hadn't been established yet. This is just my way of trying to brace you for why Dimitri, one of the biggest a-holes in the series, would be the leader of this team. Because remember, when the first Darkstalkers came out, he was the protagonist of that game. And as for the other 2 characters on this team, first up is Morgan. Listen, if you know the lore of Darkstalkers, this makes 0 sense because she and Dimitri hate each other and he's constantly trying to kill her. But she is the biggest character in this franchise. Even at launch, they knew she was a big deal. So it feels like she has to be included. Plus, she and Dimitri are both from Makai royal families. I could totally see some kind of a story being set up where they have to team up for the sake of their home dimension. But then the ending, when the day is saved, they go back to hating and fighting each other. But as for our third character, that was a tough call, because sure, Dimitri and Morgan don't get along, but they could have a story reason for why they would have to team up. But here's the thing about Darkstalkers characters, none of them really work well together. They're all a bunch of loners. So for this final character, I'm going with probably the most morally neutral character in the game, at least in the first game. I'm going with Victor. In that first game, all Victor wanted to do was just fight to prove to his creator that he was strong. So I could totally see Dimitri saying, hey, we need a third member, this guy just wants to fight things and he doesn't question me. So he's in. Team Commando. This should let you know how far back we're going in our time machines. We're going to give a team to Captain Commando, whose game came out in 1991. We're doing this for 2 reasons. One is because Captain Commando had a full squad fighting beside him, so we have a built-in team right there ready to go. But also because, for anyone who hasn't heard this a dozen times over by now, Captain Commando was designed to be Capcom's mascot back in the day. That's why they called him Captain Commando. Captain Commando. Capcom. Get it? Granted, that didn't really go anywhere as Captain Commando only got 1 game, but again, it's 1994. We're early enough in the timeline that he still holds some sway. Now there is one problem, which is that Captain Commando's team was made up of 4 characters, and we only have 3 spots. So, who are we going to include? Well, I'm going to throw in their baby Commando, simply because they're the big strong one on the team, and there will always be a spot in your fighting game roster for the big strong one. They can be a grappler, they can be a tank, there's always a role that the big strong guy can fill. But for the final spot on this team, well, I gotta go back to my old adage. A roster can't just have the faces, it needs the freaks. You can't just have the staples, you also need the weird picks. And out of our final two characters, we have a ninja, who is just a ninja, and fights like a ninja, and a mummy who is actually an alien in a backwards baseball cap, and they've got a spinning attack and knives that can cut through it. You know what? I don't even have to finish that sentence. It's Mummy Commando. You all know it's going to be Mummy Commando. I don't think I have to explain this. I mean, heck, speaking of weird picks, I've been using their code names. Mummy Commando's real name is Mac the Knife. They named him after a weird 80s McDonald's Cinnabite mascot. If we're talking potential Hall of Fame weird picks here, it's Mummy Commando. Team Adventure. And for our final team, I'm going with a team that really could have only existed in 1994. Team Adventure, and I know you might be thinking, that's kind of a basic name. Who would come up with a name like that? I'll tell you who. Capcom. You see, at the end of the 80s and the start of the 90s, they put out a string of quiz games in the arcades, with the most popular one being Adventure Quiz. Arguably the most successful of these games was Adventure Quiz 2, Capcom World, released in 1992. And it starred this green magical girl called Pure the Mage. If you ever played the original Marvel vs. Capcom, you'll remember her as the assist who drops down to throw some dice at the opponent. Well, in Adventure Quiz 2, Pure is trying to protect the residents of Capcom World, who, as you can guess, are all characters from other Capcom games. So you got a character who appears in a Capcom crossover game, trying to protect the residents of a Capcom town. And we're picking a roster for a Capcom crossover game made 2 years after that one came out. Yeah, throw her in here. And let's throw in some other Capcom characters who just wouldn't fit anywhere else. Let's say Pure has the power to travel between worlds, and she's gathering together heroes to help her in this tournament because she thinks something bad is going to happen to all these Capcom characters. Think of it as an early version of Team Another World from King of Fighters 14. For her other two team members, let's go with the more fantastical, far out there characters. Ones it would be hard to come up with a modern day version of them, like we did with Mega Man. First up, Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins. Love it or hate it, this was a big series for Capcom at this time, and it remains one of their most notable titles to this day. Then let's throw in another character who was kind of a symbol for the more obscure Capcom arcade games back in the early 90s. Michelle Hart from Legendary Wings. Or as some of you might know her, the assist in Marvel vs. Capcom who looks like an angel with a gun. That's right, we're doing team characters who would be assist in another fighting game in 4 years. But that doesn't really roll off the tongue, so we'll just stick with Team Adventure. I was tempted to throw Strider Hiryu in here somewhere, but Hiryu doesn't feel as out there as some of these other characters. Like, if you put Hiryu next to Pure and Arthur, you would think, yeah, one of these is out of place. Plus, Hiryu is a character who would remain popular to this day and continue popping up in other series as time would go on. But Pure, Arthur, and Michelle, you look at this lineup and you think, yeah, that was Capcom KOF 94. So, there you are. 8 teams based around what characters Capcom had access to in 1994. Not really as interesting of a roster as I thought it was going to be when I came up with this idea. I mean, Team Adventure was pretty out there, but after that, yeah, there isn't really a lot here. Kinda makes you realize how much Capcom popped off in the later half of this decade. At this point, they were still kinda coming into their own. You know I said that we would get right into the actual main roster after this, but I can't leave us off on that. We have to do a good retro roster here. And KOF didn't just put out a handful of games over the years. No, they put out so many games, they would divide them into storylines. So let's jump ahead by 5 years to the start of the next storyline, and let's build the roster for Capcom King of Fighters 1999. Okay, so let's assume that just like SNK, this Capcom KOF franchise kept putting out their annual installments, with the first storyline ending in 1997, Then they would put out a best of Everyone Is Here style game in 1998. And now it's 1999. We're all worried about Y2K and we're starting to wonder if the last season of The Simpsons wasn't all that good. So to distract ourselves, we hunt down that one arcade that's still open in town, and there we see Capcom King of Fighters 99. A brand new storyline has begun with a brand new roster. Now, since we're trying to match KOF's actual rosters from that year, in 1999, KOF's roster was only made up of 7 teams, one less from the original game. However, there was one big change that they made to keep the roster interesting. They expanded the teams from 3 to 4 characters. So even though we only have 7 teams, we still have to come up with 28 characters. Plus a handful of single entries, which is a brand new concept for this game, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's start with our first team.
Fighters ready. Engage.
Team World Warriors. I feel like how every single King of Fighters game had a team hero, every single Capcom KOF game should have a Team World Warriors, some team that's the face of Street Fighter. Now, as for who would be on this team, I figure Ryu and Ken are always going to be 2 classic choices, but let's spice things up with the next 2 spots. Between 1994 and 1999, we got introduced to Sakura in the Alpha games, who would be Ryu's #1 fan, following him around and wanting to learn from him. And then in Street Fighter 3, we got introduced to Sean, who would be Ken's #1 fan, following him around and wanting to learn from him. So, let's say Ken and Ryu team up again, and they both decide to see how Sakura and Sean can handle this big tournament. Plus, I just feel like Sean and Sakura need to finally interact at some point in Street Fighter. Ken's #1 fan and Ryu's #1 fan, they'd get along great together. This needs to happen. Team New Generation. Speaking of Street Fighter 3, I know that when it originally landed in arcades it was a dud, so there is a chance Capcom would try to ignore it in this crossover game, kinda like they did in the Capcom vs SNK and Marvel vs Capcom games. But I'm making this roster with the gift of hindsight, so I can't ignore them. And considering Third Strike was released in '99, yeah, they deserve their own team. Leader of the team would be Alex. He was the new protagonist of Street Fighter 3, so it just makes sense. Then Yoon was a massive hit in the game. Third Strike Yoon is one of the most top-tier Street Fighter characters of all time, so let's throw him in here as well. But as for the remaining 2 spots, part of me really wants to include Dudley, but considering Alex and Yoon are younger guys, and we're using the name New Generation, I kind of want to stick with the characters that give off that vibe of young heroes who are going to be big deals in the future. So let's throw in there Elena and Makoto. Makoto was another huge hit for Third Strike. Even when they were doing location tests for the game, the audiences voted her as their favorite. And I'm going with Elena simply because I think her personality would be fun to see bouncing off the other members of the team. The tall, super positive and upbeat Elena hanging out with the short, grumpy Makoto, that's just a classic comedy pairing right there. I did get real close to putting Ibuki in here, but, well, I think I got a better spot for her. Team Ninjutsu. I will admit I was originally going to call this Team Ninja, but then I remembered, oh right, that's actually already a thing. By 1999, Capcom had a diverse enough lineup of games and characters that we could start mixing them together to create some really interesting teams. And I had to get Strider Hiryu in here somewhere. In 1999, he came back with the hit Strider Hiryu 2. Not that one. That one. And he was in the brand new Marvel vs. Capcom game that was released just the year before, so I had to fit him in here. However, he didn't have a huge lineup of allies that we could shove onto this team. But he is a ninja. And if you tell kids in 1999 that there would be a team full of ninjas in this game, you instantly know what team would be everyone's favorite. You might as well call this team cool because if you played them, that's what you were. So you got Hiryu as the leader of the team. Then as I said, we got Ibuki as the newest Capcom ninja from Street Fighter making her way onto the team. Next up, we sadly couldn't bring back Team Final Fight this time around. There's just not enough spots. But luckily, Final Fight has its own ninja with Guy. However, In Final Fight 2, they introduced another student of Guy's Bushinryu style, Maki, and people loved Maki. She would later be added to Capcom vs. SNK and Street Fighter Alpha, so you know what, I'm going to once again use the power of hindsight here and just go ahead and put her on this team. But as for the final spot, that's a tough call because I want to include Lin Kurosawa because she's a big fan favorite, and I know the developers at Capcom love her. They've tried to put her in fighting games multiple times, but the reason they haven't been able to is because she comes from the Alien vs. Predator beat-em-up game. And as you can imagine, Capcom does not own Alien nor Predator, so there's all kinds of legal problems around her. However, in 2000, they tried to put her in the arcade shooter Cannon Spike. But since they didn't know if they could use her or not, they instead created a brand new character named Simone, who was a stand-in for her. So, I say we put Lin Kurosawa on this team with the giant asterisk next to her name that says if there are legal problems and we can't use her, we just swap her out for Simone. Yes, Simone officially first appeared a year after this game would have come out, but again, she was created to be a stand-in for Lin Kurosawa. My theory is if Capcom was willing to create her for that purpose in 2000, they would have been willing to do it in 99 as well. Team Justice. After 94, Capcom really started to go nuts with its fighting games, creating a whole crazy string of new franchises. My personal favorite was Rival Schools, which at this point had a worldwide release and an updated version that just recently released in Japan, so it feels like it was popular enough to get a team. And I'm going to call them Team Justice simply because the name of the series in Japan is Justice Academy. And you know what? Rival Schools would fit into this game great because Rival Schools was already a team-based fighting game. Problem is, that game used 3-person teams, so it would have been perfect any other year except for this one. Yes, remember, in 1999, KOF was doing 4-person teams. Luckily though, the main team in Rival Schools was from Taiyo Academy, Batsu, Kyosuke, and Hinata. And in the updated version of Rival Schools that was released in 1998, they introduced another Taiyo student, Ran Hibiki, the energetic photographer for the school's paper who's always looking for a scoop. So I can totally see her teaming up with her fellow classmates to try and find out what's really going on behind the scenes of this tournament. Because it's a KOF game, something is always going on behind the scenes of the tournament. Team Special Forces. There is no way that I could leave Chun-Li out of a Capcom crossover game. I learned that lesson after our very first episode. But I don't want the Street Fighter team to just be the same lineup every single time. Well, if you follow the story of KOF, you know they always love to put in there their secret government team investigating whoever the new big evil organization is. And Street Fighter has tons of characters who are themed around military organizations who all work together within the story, so it would make total sense for all of them to join together. Let's go with Chun-Li, Guile, Cammy, and Nash. I know people are going to argue that doesn't make sense, seeing as how Nash died a long time ago, but as I have already pointed out, KOF takes place in an alternate timeline from the games it's crossing over, and characters who are dead in their individual games are often alive in KOF. I don't see why that would be any different in the Capcom KOF. And Charlie Nash was a big deal around this time. He was in the Alpha games that just wrapped up, and he was in the Versus games, so it would make sense to jump on that popularity. I know some people are going to argue that we shouldn't have both him and Guile on a team together because they play too similar, but again, it's 1999 and we have 28 characters in this roster. Realistically speaking, having a few characters in here who share some moves together just makes sense. Team Future Force. We need another crazy crossover team, and this might be the craziest one yet. I wanted to bring back the Mega Man team, but by this point the hot title wasn't Mega Man, but Mega Man X. So I figured let's give them a team. Only problem is that now that we're up to 4 character teams, that was a little bit rough. X and Zero were the obvious choices. They had to be in here. But after that, well, Axel didn't exist yet, so we couldn't use him. Maybe we could use Alia? I mean, she fought in a couple of games. Wait, no, she didn't exist yet either. Could we give Iris a full moveset? I don't know, that doesn't feel right. Maybe we could use Sigma and say that since this timeline is different, he hasn't gone evil yet, but then we're still missing one character. So instead of focusing just on Mega Man, I decided to expand my horizons a little bit. I decided to look at some other series and I thought, okay, Mega Man X is about a future involving robots. Doesn't Capcom have a couple of franchises that match that description? Yeah, both Cyberbots and Star Gladiator came out a little bit before this, and both Jin and Hayato would be put into Marvel vs. Capcom 2 just the next year. So, let's put together a team made up of various Capcom heroes from the future. I already pointed out that KOF does plenty of time travel stories, so that's not too much of a stretch. Team Stars. As weird as it might seem to make a team dedicated to Resident Evil characters in a fighting game, by 1999, 3 installments of this franchise had come out and it was quickly becoming Capcom's biggest smash hit. We have to do it. Plus, as I have pointed out so many times, KOF 99 switched to a 4-person team format. How many playable characters were in Resident Evil 1? 2. How many playable characters were in Resident Evil 2? 2. Did all of us pass first grade math? I sure hope so, because that equals 4. Yep, our team stars will be Jill, Chris, Leon, and Claire. Again, I realize taking characters from Resident Evil and making them fighting game characters might feel a bit odd, but remember, KOF had the Ikari Warriors, a run-and-gun franchise, and they brought them over to KOF and made them big heavy hitters and grapplers, so I can totally see Capcom doing the same here. We could give Jill some throw attacks and nickname her the Master of Headlocking. Leon would be a quicker knife-wielding rushdown character. Claire, with her weapon expertise, would be a solid zoner. And if there is any Capcom character I could see gain a Galactica Phantom, it's Chris Redfield. In fact, speaking of Team Stars, I know I've mentioned multiple times that KOF builds its games around a story that go over the course of 3 or 4 games, but I'm not worrying exactly about what the story is going to be, because this is all some alternate reality what-if scenario. We have no idea what stories could or could not be playing out here. However, in this one specific instance, I will say, the second KOF storyline was based around Nest, an evil scientific organization trying to take over the world by creating super soldiers. Considering how big Resident Evil was at the time and that this game would introduce Team Stars, the villain of this particular KOF storyline has to be Umbrella. You could get a supercharged Wesker in the final game, a Team Umbrella down the road, and you could also have it influence our 2 final roster spots. In KOF 99, the previous hero and rival Kyo and Iori weren't on any teams. They were secret unlockable single entry characters. This is because Kyo had been kidnapped by Nest and experimented on to make clones of him. Well, as I said, if we're following the idea that Umbrella would be up to some crazy super science, there's one Capcom character who has a long history of evil organizations trying to experiment on him to get his power. Ryu. Everybody wants a taste of that sweet Satsui no Hado. So let's make the 2 unlockable characters Evil Ryu, who would be awakened after Umbrella gets their hands on the Hadouken hero, and Akuma, who would enter the fight after sensing Ryu's evil energy. Because if there is one Capcom character who does not play well with others, so it would make 0 sense for them to be on a team, it's Akuma. So there you go, our roster for Capcom King of Fighters 1999. And you know what? I feel good about this one. It's a much more interesting roster. We've really shown off all the different characters that Capcom could possibly provide, reached into all the various different universes that this company has to offer. So you know what? I think it's time that we finally move on. After getting those first 2 rosters out of the way, we can now jump to the modern day and show everyone what a modern-day Capcom King of Fighters game would look like. Although, it just occurred to me that King of Fighters has had 4 different storylines over these many years, and, well, we did rosters for the first 2 storylines, and now we're going to do a roster set during the 4th one. Kind of feels like a missed opportunity to not try and do a roster for each of them, and screw it, we're gonna do 4 rosters today! Wow, I ended up making this video way longer and more complicated than I originally intended. This really is our anniversary episode, isn't it? Alright, now the 3rd KOF storyline started in 2003. However, there weren't too many big new developments for Capcom between 1999 and 2003. Don't get me wrong, there were a handful of new titles, but most of them just started. They didn't really have enough there to really build a whole team out of. So instead of looking at the first game in the 3rd KOF saga, we're going to jump to its final game, KOF 13, which released in 2010. Not only is this game considered to be the best in the saga, many consider it to be the best KOF game ever. Plus, in 2003, Capcom wasn't really that interested in fighting games anymore. But by 2010, they had come roaring back. So, let's jump ahead to the year 2010. Soccer fans had fallen in love with the Vuvuzela, and John Cusack and Rob Corddry were captivating the world with tales of a time-traveling hot tub. And now it was time for Capcom fans to once again enter the King of Fighters. With a roster of 10 teams, although we had gone back down to 3 characters each, which means we have 30 characters to assign to these teams. So let's begin with Team World Warriors. Yeah, no surprise here. As I said, we should always have a Team Street Fighter. And 2009, Street Fighter 4 came out and took the world by storm, becoming one of Capcom's best-selling games ever. It brought in a huge audience and helped to revive Capcom's fighting game scene, so of course they would be front and center once again. And that's also why I'm returned to the original lineup of Ryu, Ken, and Chun-Li. Street Fighter 4 was loaded with nostalgia for Street Fighter 2 and was all about returning to what made that game a success. So, making this the exact same team from the original lineup just makes sense.
This party's getting crazy. Let's rock.
Team Devil May Cry. Alright, after that last team, we need some new blood. So, let's include one of Capcom's biggest franchises over the past few years, Devil May Cry. This series was huge for Capcom in the 2000s, giving us memorable characters and some of the best action for this generation. In fact, this is one of the big reasons I wanted to try and match KOF 13's roster rather than KOF 2003's. Because back in 2003, only Devil May Cry 1 and 2 had come out. And let's just say right after Devil May Cry 2 was not the right time to try and promote that series. But by 2010, we were all the way up to DMC4, meaning this series had now fully established who Dante was and why we love that character. And we had far more of his supporting cast to pull from. For this team, I'm going to go with Dante, obviously, Trish, probably his most often reoccurring partner, and Lady, who was a big hit in DMC 3 and returned for DMC 4. And thanks to her long list of weapons, she'd be an obvious zoner for this team. I know some people would expect Nero to be in here, seeing as how he was recently introduced in the brand new Devil May Cry 4, but these were three-person teams, and at this point it was firmly established that Dante, Trish, and Lady were all working together, so it just makes sense. Although, King of Fighters 13 did have 3 single entry spots. So, you know what? Let's give one of those spots to Nero. You could have him play fairly similar to Dante, maybe not as quick and agile, but you could also give him a command grab with that big demon arm of his.
His name, the ultimate superhero, the only one who can save the world from extinction. If he can't do it, no one can.
Who? Me?
Team Beautiful. This is another team that kinda justifies me pushing this to 2010 rather than 2003, because I had to give Beautiful Joe some love. Problem is, the first Beautiful Joe game came out in 2003, so we couldn't exactly give him his own team back then. But now, we had Beautiful Joe 1, Beautiful Joe 2, Red Hot Rumble, Double Trouble. Granted, the last of those games came out in 2005 and Capcom has kind of been ignoring him since. Man, Joe really hit the scene hard and then burned out fast, didn't he? Well, screw it. They still had enough games since the last installment and built up a big enough fan base that I think he deserves his own team in this game. The two heads of the team would obviously be Joe and Sylvia, but for the third spot, I'm going to go with Captain Blue Jr. I know some people are going to argue that the original Captain Blue should take this spot, but seeing as how the original Blue acted as a villain in the first game and Jr. uses yo-yos, which would give him a very unique moveset, yeah, I feel like he's a better fit. Team Night Warriors. They had to sit out the 99 roster simply because of how limited that roster size was, but you can't leave a good Darkstalker down forever. Plus, around this time, there were a lot of rumblings about a possible new Darkstalkers game. Feels like it would have been the appropriate time to give this team another chance. And as for their lineup, well, Capcom kind of already gave that to us the next year. In February 2011, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 would come out, and how many Darkstalkers were in there? 3. Felicia, Morgan, and Hisinko. And you know what? I can totally see these 3 working together. Hisinko and Felicia are 2 heroes in this game who are trying to help humans, and Morgan pretty much only cares about herself, but she does find the human world to be interesting, and she loves to go there looking for fun and entertainment, so hey, if she came down and saw these 2 were looking for a teammate for this big fighting tournament, I could see her joining up. She'd probably find it to be an interesting thing to pass the time.
Capcom presents
Team Adventure. That's right, we're bringing Team Adventure back from the first game, although it's a little bit different this time. Team Adventure to me feels like it should just be random Capcom characters who are all kind of just here for one time only, but arcade fans still have a close attachment to them. And you know what was one of the final Capcom arcade games that had a big fan following? Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Now, as I said, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was in development at this time. They knew it was happening. In fact, they had just released their big Marvel vs. Capcom collection that included Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and 2 on digital stores. And then they would almost immediately get rid of that because we just can't have nice things in this world. But my point is, to this day, people still love Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And by 2010, nostalgia for that game was running high. People were excited to play a Marvel vs. Capcom game again. Well, in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Capcom created a handful of original characters who had never appeared in any other game. Ruby Heart, Amingo, and Sansan. Although Sansan did appear in another game, but this wasn't the same Sansan. There's a whole lore behind this, you don't need to know it. My point is, with Marvel Fever at a boil in 2010, it would be a smart idea to give those players a treat. Let's have Ruby use her ship, which can travel between realities, to once again bring together a group of random Capcom characters from different worlds and recreate Team Adventure. Heck, if you want to get really cute with it, you could have her ship be staffed by members of the previous Team Adventure or other Capcom arcade characters. In fact, you know what? It just occurred to me. I'm going off script here for a second. This just popped in my head right now. You know those Capcom arcade collection things they keep releasing digitally? Have Ruby Heart be like the host of them. Like, you turn on those arcade collection things, and there's a menu of all the games that you've purchased, and Ruby Heart is just there on the menu, like guiding you through all the options and all the different games you've gotten. Doing that one thing all by itself would get so many Versus fans to sign up for that thing just to get one little dose of nostalgia. Sorry, that idea just came to me right now, and I had to share it. Anyway, on to the rest of the roster. Team Samurai Heroes. While much of the world might be unfamiliar with Sengoku Basara, during the 2000s it became one of the most popular series for Capcom in Japan. So I can easily see a team being built around this franchise. I decided to go with the name Samurai Heroes since that was what they called the international release of Sengoku Basara 3, which released in 2010, the same year as this game. Now, I will fully admit, Sengoku Basara is one of those series that has always been on my radar. I've always been interested in checking it out, but I still have never gotten the chance. It's one of those series that I just have never gotten to put my hands on. So I'm sure there's a super obvious 3-person team for this series that the big Basara fans out there are screaming for, so I apologize in advance because I'm probably going to miss it. However, I have put a good chunk of hours into Sengoku Basara Cross, the fighting game spin-off for it, because yes, it is incredibly broken and janky, but it is broken and janky in all the best ways. That game is a ton of fun. So, because of that, I'm going to go with one of the 3-person teams from that game. Yukimura Sanada, Sasuke Saratobi, and Shingen Takeda. Yukimura is one of the faces of the series. He is on almost every bit of promotional material for Sengoku Basara, so I'm confident in saying he is a strong representative for this series. And Takeda is his battle-hardened, fight-loving commander, and Saratobi is the calm-head ninja who serves under both of them. So not only is one of these characters a major face for the series, and they all work together in the series, but also, when it comes to their playstyles, we got solid variety here. Takeda is your big, slow, heavy hitter. Saratobi is your light and fast character. And Sanada with that spear of his would be a solid mid-range fighter. Heck, he'd probably even be a Rekka character because in the games, he even has a move called Rekka. That just seems super obvious to me. Also, while we're talking about samurai heroes from Capcom, I was tempted to create an Onimusha team, but sadly, most of Onimusha's big heroes are all based on real actors, and because of that, there are all kinds of legal issues surrounding them. But Saki, the protagonist from the 4th game, is a completely original character. And while I don't think we need to make a whole team based just around Onimusha 4, we could still make sure to give this series some love and make Saki one of the 3 single-entry characters.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Team Special Forces. I know this might not seem like a huge team that needs to come back in each game, but as I point out, KOF always had that one team of super agents in their games, and while we don't have to follow that tradition, it does give us a good excuse to include multiple characters from different corners of Capcom. I figure out of the 3 remaining characters from the previous version of this team, Cammy is easily the most popular, so we have to bring her back. But for the other 2 spots, let's look outside of Street Fighter and create some really odd combinations. First up, Leon Kennedy. Between now and the last roster that we did, Resident Evil 4 blew up and became one of the biggest games Capcom has ever made. And in that game, Leon was a special agent working directly for the White House. So if this is a team of government super soldiers, yeah, Leon is the obvious choice. Although for the 3rd roster spot, that's a little bit less obvious. Okay, this is going to sound weird, especially coming from me, because this is not really a popular choice. I mean, I've even made fun of him multiple times within the last month. I'm talking about Nathan Rad Spencer, the Bionic Commando. Yes, I know everyone makes fun of the 2009 Bionic Commando, but it was a recent game, so you could totally argue it was at least relevant at the time, and he did wind up in Marvel vs. Capcom, which released the next year. So you know someone at Capcom was pushing hard for this character. And hey, considering the KOF games are in their own separate continuity, maybe we could completely ignore the whole wife arm situation, yeah. That's a thing, and no, I will not elaborate for the 5 people out there who don't know what I'm talking about. In fact, yeah, you know what, let's just completely ignore the wife arm, and the horrible dreadlocks, and the bad acting, and just everything else relating to Bionic Commando 2009. We're just going to ignore that, and you know what? This is going to be Nathan Spencer from the old Bionic Commando games. Yeah, around this time, Capcom also put out some Bionic Commando games that were smaller and designed to feel like the original game, so you know what? We could just make this the original Bionic Commando Nathan Spencer, and then we'd still get that cross-promotion synergy, and nobody would complain. Problem solved.
We're in.
Let's move.
Team Stars. Now you might have heard that Leon was on Team Special Forces and thought, oh, I guess Team Stars isn't here. Oh no, we're definitely bringing them back, especially considering that Resident Evil 5 released in 2009 and it broke records as Capcom's best-selling game to date. So let's create a team based entirely around that game, with Chris and Sheva being obvious inclusions. And for the 3rd spot, let's go with the now supercharged Jill, just not under Wesker's control like she was in Marvel 3. Also, spoiler alert for Resident Evil 5, I guess. My bad. I know most people really want to ignore the fact that Jill got turned into an odd Wesker hybrid creature there in that game, but it does give us an excuse to give her a completely different moveset, and that means that we would have a character in this game who wouldn't just be using guns, which is something that a lot of the Team Stars characters would use. It would make her play completely different compared to Chris and Sheva, so yeah, we should probably take advantage of that. Now I will say, seeing as how we have a zombie hunting team in here, I was tempted to include Frank West, seeing as how Dead Rising was pretty big at the moment. But there was no way that I could see Frank working alongside these other zombie hunters. They just felt too different. There's no way that they would be able to cooperate long enough to be on a team together. So instead, let's just include Frank on here as our 3rd and final single entry character.
Stop playing around. We want some answers.
You haven't changed.
Team Umbrella. Remember when we did that first roster and Street Fighter was so big that we gave them multiple teams? Well, in 2010, the biggest moneymaker for Capcom was easily Resident Evil, and history is about to repeat itself. Resident Evil 5 became Capcom's highest selling game, and that was fresh off the heels of Resident Evil 4, which many fans and critics were calling one of the best games of all time. So of course we have to give them multiple teams. And we already gave them the hero team, so now we gotta give them the villain team. We're putting together Team Umbrella. And yes, I know I said that Team Umbrella would be introduced in the last storyline because they'd be the big villains of that story, but I also didn't plan on doing 4 rosters today, so I didn't really think that far ahead, so just go with it. None of this is real, it's just for fun. Now the head of this team has to be Wesker. I would argue that his smarmy, scene-eating villainy in Resident Evil 5 is one of the reasons fans love that game so much. That game propelled him into being one of Capcom's biggest bad guys, so he is going to be front and center on this team. Also, before someone points it out in the comments, yes, I am aware that in Resident Evil 5, the organization that Wesker was heading up was not called Umbrella, but we're still going to call this Team Umbrella simply because it's far more iconic. And real talk, if you ask a group of people what was the organization that Wesker was heading up in Resident Evil 5, 9 out of 10 of them are going to say Umbrella. Nobody remembers what the actual name of that organization was. Heck, I don't even remember what it was, and no, I am not going to look it up. I refuse. Yeah, I'm sorry, but between its history and its logo, Umbrella is just far more iconic to the Resident Evil series. So yes, we are going to be sticking with that name. It's kind of like the same thing with Chris's team. There's a reason we're calling that Team Stars and not Team BSAA. When you think of Resident Evil, one of those two names immediately pops into your head, so that's what we're going with. Then after Wesker, we have to include Umbrella's #1 secret weapon, Nemesis. I mean, not only is he a big face for this series, but he got added to Marvel vs. Capcom a year after this. They clearly already had a moveset in mind for him. But after that, well, it's kind of a hard choice. Since RE5 was so big at the moment, I was tempted to try and include Excella Gioni. She was Wesker's partner in that game, until his inevitable betrayal, but it's Wesker, that part goes without saying. Problem is, she's not a fighter. We could get creative with it and give her some potions and chemicals she could toss around to mess with the opponent, let her summon out Ouroboros, call in some of the monsters from RE5, but that feels like we're stretching just a bit too hard to fit her in here. So let's go back a game. In RE4, Wesker had Ada and Krauser working for him, and yes, Ada is a far more prominent face in this series, but even in the middle of that game, they knew she wasn't serious about working with him and was planning on double-crossing him. So instead, let's go with Krauser. He seemed way more loyal to Wesker, and he is definitely a more combat-focused character. Yes, he did die in RE4, but as I have said several times now, KOF isn't canon to the games it's crossing over. We can just say that he survived in this timeline, or that Wesker found him later and revived him. This is a series all about zombies after all. There is definitely a way that we could bring him back. Team NetNavi. Another KOF, another generation of Mega Man to give a team to. Over the 2000s, a brand new Mega Man franchise, Battle Network, was taking the handheld market by storm. It had constant releases, back to back, an animated series. This thing was everywhere for a while. And for this team, I'm going to go with Mega Man EXE, obviously, who would probably have some similar attacks to the original Mega Man. You know, playing largely like a zoner with his projectiles, but he could also have some completely original specials based around all of his moves from his series. Or if you want to get really creative with it, maybe we could give him a super where he damages sections of the screen, and if the opponent stands there, then they continuously take damage or suffer some kind of a stats effect. The Battle Network series has a very unique combat system that doesn't really translate well to a traditional 2D fighting game, but something like that I feel could be a good compromise. And for his two teammates, listen, I know they're not the two biggest characters in this series. I know that because I read the comments during our Mega Man Builder roster a few years back, but they are close allies of Mega Man. I'm going to go with Roll and Gutsman. Roll would be a lighter, quicker character. Gutsman would be your big, tanky grappler. The two of them combined with Mega Man's heavier zoning would create for a good balance. And there you have it, folks, our third of 2 rosters today. Only one more to go of our 2 rosters for this video. I swear I wasn't actually planning on doing 4 when I started writing this script, it just kind of happened. But it's the anniversary episode, I always have to go big with that one. So let's hop back into our DeLoreans one final time as we go back to the future for our final roster. Okay, now for the thing we actually came here for today. The year is 2024, when everything is great and nothing is going wrong. This is obviously sarcasm, we're living in hell, and coming up with fake video game rosters is the only escape we have. For this final roster, we're going to be looking at the most recent King of Fighters 15, which had a starting roster of 13 teams, 3 characters each. And yes, King of Fighters 15 did come out in 2022, but I'm just going to build this roster around 2024 because, well, the entire point of today's episode was to build a King of Fighters game based around Capcom properties. Doing the whole year-by-year thing was just something I came up with while I was writing it, so that way we could get a little bonus challenge in there. For the main roster, I'm sticking with the initial plan. However, with that being said, one big thing I want to clear up about this final roster. With all the other rosters that we did today, I tried to base those rosters around what games were big or being talked about in those particular years, or in the years between that game and the previous game that we talked about. However, I'm not going to do that for this final one because, well, I hate saying it, but that would make this roster really boring. Folks, over the years, I've made a lot of jokes on this channel about how Capcom loves to just focus on Resident Evil and Street Fighter and Monster Hunter. But it wasn't until I was making this roster that I actually went year by year looking at Capcom's releases and oh, that joke isn't funny anymore. Don't get me wrong, Capcom does put out a bunch of random one-shot games every now and again, and their future is actually looking bright. It looks like they do have several new titles on the way that are going to spice things up. But over the past 5 years, yeah, it has just been Resident Evil, Street Fighter, Monster Hunter, and a bunch of re-releases. As I said, the future is looking bright, but for now, yeah, I'm not going to worry about building a roster based around their recent games because that would lead to less variety than we had in the 94 roster. So instead, these teams are going to be from all over Capcom's history, but there is going to be a dash of modern day representation in there, so that way it does feel relevant. So, let's get into it with our first team, the one you all know is going to be the first team.
I've crossed paths with many during my journey for true strength. I've also met my share of enemies, opponents I had to overcome. My journey knows no end. I will continue to do what I have always done.
Fighter 6.
Team World Warriors. How many times do I need to say it? There will always be a Team Street Fighter. But to keep things a bit relevant, I'm going to make this team Ryu, Chun-Li, and the big surprise addition, Guile. Yeah, I'm leaving Ken off the team this time because if you follow the story of Street Fighter 6, you know that Ken ain't doing too hot at the moment. He's on the run from the law, so I figured throwing onto this team Ryu, his oldest friend, Chun-Li, another longtime friend of his, and Guile, his brother-in-law, would make for a good team that could all be coming together with the common goal of finding out what happened to Ken. And yes, I have said many times now that KOF is not set in the same continuity as the games it's crossing over. So what is happening in Street Fighter 6 would in no way impact this Capcom KOF game. However, the KOF games do love to include their own unique takes on the mainline stories. For example, when Terry Bogard had a time skip and started rocking a bomber jacket and adopted Rock Howard in the Fatal Fury games, same thing happened in KOF. It didn't happen under the same circumstances, but it still happened. So, while we wouldn't have the exact same thing happening in this KOF game that's happening in Street Fighter 6, we can still have something similar going on with Ken. We can still have a mystery of where did Ken go, and then we can maybe make him a single entry DLC character in Season 2. Now, I know right now some of you are asking, hold up, you wanted to get more modern and relevant with the Street Fighter team, but you still chose nothing but classic characters? What gives? Where are all the new characters? Oh, don't you worry. Those characters are right around the corner in...
Here comes a new challenger.
When you go looking for strength, it's not like a game. This journey doesn't have a real ending. If you want to start off on the right foot in this city, hit the streets.
Team Metro City. Yep, for the first time since 1994, we are bringing back Team Metro City, but with a few new faces. And what a face it is! Capcom has been promoting Luke as the new Mr. Street Fighter. When you think of Street Fighter 6, they want you to think of Luke. So it would make sense for him to be in this game. And I was going to put him on Team World Warrior, but then I started thinking about it a bit and I realized we could actually give him his own team. He's got a rival in the series, Jamie, but their rivalry is a friendly one. So, just like Ken and Ryu, I could see the two of them joining up for this tournament. But in the story for Street Fighter 6, or at least in the prequel stories in the comics, Luke is closely connected to Ken, and he knows all about how JP set him up. Well, you know who else has a vendetta against JP? Kimberly. Her uncle was an advisor between Ken and JP, but he disappeared, and now she's trying to find out what happened to him. And out of all these new characters introduced in this game, these three all reside in Metro City. So, they all have a connection, either to each other or to a shared goal. They all live in the same city, and out of all the new characters introduced in this game, these three seem to be the most promoted. They definitely have that vibe of the next generation of heroes. I mean, heck, Kimberly and Jamie were even both directly inspired by previous Street Fighters. They feel like a perfect team to me. So, that's 2 Street Fighter teams. I don't have any more Street Fighter specific teams coming up. However, Street Fighter 6 is huge right now. I'm definitely going to load a couple more Street Fighter characters in here, including with a team I've been wanting to put into this game since the very first roster.
Here comes a new challenger.
Team Slam Masters. Yeah, I wasn't joking around. I have actually been trying to get this team into one of these rosters since the first one in '94, back when it would have made way more sense. But sadly, it just kept getting pushed off for one team or another. But darn it, we're on the final roster now. We got 13 full spots. I'm getting my team grapplers in here. Let's make a team dedicated to all the various wrestling leagues that exist within the Capcom universe and give them a name based around their old wrestling franchise. Which, okay, I know why doesn't Capcom bring this back is the number one thing anyone asks whenever they talk about Capcom. But when you consider how big wrestling games are, it really is shocking that Capcom doesn't try to do something with this. But yes, load this roster up with some famous Capcom wrestlers. Zangief is an obvious choice, Armika is crazy popular, and for the final spot, we have to let Hagar and Zangief finally be on a team together. The sheer machismo of these two together would be unstoppable. One Predator handshake between the two of them would be enough to blow any enemy away.
Here comes a new challenger.
Team Fatale. This is another one of those teams that if you saw our Capcom vs. SNK 3 roster a few years back, you probably saw it coming. We had a team with the same name back then, but don't worry, the lineup is a little bit different this time. We have to include Juria in here somewhere. She's one of the most popular characters for Capcom these days, And over the course of Street Fighter V and VI, we've seen that she and C. Viper, another fairly popular character from Street Fighter IV, do work alongside each other and go on missions together for whoever their current mysterious employer may be. So, I was thinking, who is another badass lady who takes on missions for money? Often from mysterious and probably villainous groups. Simple, Ada Wong. She's one of the biggest faces for the Resident Evil series, and she's an experienced fighter who we could give a super agile playstyle to. But she is kind of a loner. She's not exactly someone who would be willing to be on a team with other people unless she was being paid money. Which means if she's going to be in this game, it would have to be on a team with some other shady spies and mercenaries, making this the perfect place for her.
Here comes a new challenger.
They're demons! I've seen them with my own eyes! Red Grave is completely taken over!
Let us pray for mercy. This is a trial from the heavens above.
Team Devil May Cry. Devil May Cry should always return with a brand new team because this series is so important to Capcom, you would be crazy to ignore it for years at a time. Right, Capcom? See you in 2032, Devil May Cry 6. Again, if you saw our Capcom vs. SNK 3 builder roster a few years back, you probably saw this coming, but I'll just repeat what I said in that video. Our team is going to be Dante, Nero, and V, because Devil May Cry 5 came out a few years ago and it took the world by storm. It was a massive hit for Capcom, and these were the 3 playable characters in there. I know some people are going to say that we should swap out V for Virgil, but Virgil isn't exactly known for playing well with others. So, while I could see this as a fun, one-time team-up between him and Dante, I don't really see him entering a whole tournament with the guy, let alone with his estranged son. Plus, then we'd have 3 super agile, white-haired guys with swords and big coats. We need some variety in here, and throwing in a character who summons out animal familiars to fight for him would be very different. And yes, I know people who have played Devil May Cry 5 might be wondering how V can even be in here because of spoiler reasons I won't go into, but again, I will repeat myself, KOF is in a different timeline from the games they're crossing over. We can keep or leave out whatever bits of lore we want, and we can make up whatever rules we need to justify his existence. While building rosters is way easier when I can just ignore the rules, why didn't I think of this sooner?
Here comes a new challenger.
Pleased to meet you.
Team Justice. I will fully admit my own personal bias is playing a large hand in bringing Team Justice back, because yes, there hasn't been a new rival school since before half of you were even born. However, I do actually have a reason beyond that to include them. In Street Fighter V's final season of DLC, they include Akira Kazama, and this might be the smartest addition they made to that entire game. At least the best over the past 2 seasons. A lot of people were excited for this character, and people who didn't even know who she was ended up really enjoying her in the game. And this got a lot of people talking about rival schools for the first time in years. So you know what? Let's do it. Let's strike while that iron is as hot as it has been in years and bring back Team Justice. Although this time, it's going to be very different with none of the original characters returning. We're putting Akira in here right at the front. She's the one who got everyone talking about this franchise again. She's the only one to come back in a brand new game. She's one of the most popular characters in the entire series. Of course, she is now front and center. Next up, let's throw Tiffany in here. She's one of the most popular characters in rival schools, so if we're trying to promote this series, we should probably bring our A game. And lastly, let's throw in Sakura. She was in the home release of the original Rival Schools game. In Street Fighter V, Akira has a flashback of how Sakura helped her learn how to fight. And also, listen, Akira coming back was great, but one character isn't enough for everyone to get on board with Rival Schools. We need a little bit of diversity in here. We need to start reaching out into a couple of other franchises to get people on board, start bringing in some of that fan base. So adding one of the most popular Street Fighter characters of all time onto this roster wouldn't hurt.
Here comes a new challenger.
Lycans and gentlemen, we thank you for winning. And now let the games begin.
Well, Ethan Winters. You escaped my little brother's idiot games, did you?
Don't leave. I can't let you.
The place is full of nothing but blood and death.
Team 4 Lords. Okay, we've been playing things way too safe so far. It's time that we get another team in here who does show off some modern-day Capcom titles, but at the same time, really just goes nuts. Every crossover fighting game needs that one entry that you just look at and go, really? How is that going to work? I'll let you know right now, there is no team stars in this one, and that's because over the past few Resident Evil games, either they've been remakes, meaning we've kind of already paid tribute to those titles with the previous rosters, or they've been games focusing on Ethan Winters, and hey, nothing against Ethan Winters, Dad of the Year right there. But he's not going to be in a fighting game. The dude has a very limited moveset, and also, you can't even see his face. That's part of the running gag with Ethan Winters, we're not allowed to see what he looks like. What would his entry be on the roster screen, just a question mark? But luckily, Resident Evil Village introduced a whole team of villains who kinda took the world by storm. People love the 4 Lords. Although the fact that there are 4 of them is a bit of a problem since these are 3-person teams, so one of them has to get cut. We have to include Lady Dimitrescu. I don't even feel like I need to explain that one. She was easily the most popular character. People are already asking for her to be in some kind of a Capcom versus crossover game. If in 20 years from now, people have forgotten Resident Evil Village and you want to try and remind them of which game that was, just say it was the one with the giant lady and everyone will instantly remember it. For this game, we can make her about as tall as Hugo was in Street Fighter 4 and make her slow, but give her some really good range with those extended claws of hers. Then the next biggest member of the 4 Lords, at least in terms of popularity, not actually height, when talking about Lady Dimitrescu, you have to make that clear. But we're going with Heisenberg, and I am very tempted to say let's just give him Magneto's moveset from the Versus games, but no, their powers are a little bit different. However, he would still be a huge zoner, throwing chunks of metal at the enemy, giving him a full-screen command grab where he lifts the opponent up and tosses them around, and maybe even give him a super where he can call on some of his robo-zombies to attack. But who should the final member of the team be? It's got to be either Salvatore Moreau or Donna Beneviento, and I'm going to go with Donna. Salvatore can really only fight in his big mutated form, and yeah, we can't exactly fit a giant fish monster into the ring, it's a tad too big. But as for Donna, well, she mostly uses strange chemicals that cause illusions, but that's not that hard to convert into a fighting game. There have been other fighting game characters who use illusions and tricks to trap the opponent, but those would be her special attacks. As for her normal attacks, do I even have to say it? She's a puppet fighter. Have her send her little doll across the stage for all of her normal attacks. There's an entire archetype in fighting games based around this very concept. It's kind of obvious. Also, before we move on, I know someone out there is going to ask, why aren't you using the Bakers from Resident Evil 7? Good point! Resident Evil 7 is the game that revived this entire franchise, and the Bakers are a built-in team of 3. It feels perfect. Problem is, Marguerite's design and moveset isn't going to work in a fighting game outside of Mortal Kombat. There's no way you are putting that character into this game and still getting a T for teen rating. And also, I might just be leaving to assumptions on this one, but does anyone actually like Lucas? Even if you think he's a good villain and he works in the game, does anyone actually want to play as him? Like, if it was possible to put the Bakers in here and then make their team just 3 different versions of Jack, I'd do it. But since we can't do that, we're sticking with the 4 Lords.
Here comes a new challenger.
Team Hunters. This one might as well be called Team Fantasy Fighters, seeing as how each of these characters come from Capcom's more magical Sword and Shield series. But end of the day, let's be honest, this is just Team we had to include Monster Hunter on here somewhere. Over the past decade, Monster Hunter has been the biggest moneymaker for Capcom. Heck, it almost single-handedly lifted them out of the troubles of the early 2010s. So we have to include some reps in here from that series. However, your main character in the game is a creative character who can use any of the weapons, so it won't exactly make a lot of sense to include any of the supporting characters in here, since the Monster Hunter themselves can just use all of their tools. I guess you could go with a Palico, but they're kinda too small, and after them, the only other really big stars in this series are the monsters themselves. So I say we just pair them up with some other fantasy-themed characters. And luckily for us, Capcom recently brought back another big fantasy-themed world of theirs with Dragon's Dogma 2. So, let's include the Arisen, your creative character from that game. Now, having two creative characters on the same team might seem kinda odd, but both of them would have some significant differences. For starters, we know how Monster Hunter would fight because we saw them in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. She was one of the best things to come out of that game. And her big heavy weapons make her a slower fighter with some really strong range. But for the Arisen, well, Dragon's Dogma was directed by Hideaki Itsuno, the same guy who directed the best Devil May Cry games. So let's have the Arisen move quicker with a wider variety of attacks, kind of making them like a medieval version of Dante. And for the final spot, Capcom has a few other fantasy-themed games that we could pull from, but this is a fighting game, and after thinking about it for a little bit, I realized, hey, there was a Capcom fantasy-themed fighting game a long time ago. One that was being talked about again just a few years ago when it finally got a re-release. Yep, I'm talking about Red Earth, and while I do think that maybe Leo would fit alongside these two better, I think he would fit alongside them too well. He would be another big dude holding a giant sword. So instead, I'm going to pick a character who would play completely differently, but at the same time is also rather popular. I'm talking about Tessa. This is the only character from this series to cross over into other franchises. And she uses spells and magic formulas to fight, making her a great zoner to help balance out these two more melee-heavy characters. Plus, Tessa would want to talk to the Arisen about the whole heart being stolen by a dragon thing. As someone who studies the science of sorcery, she would probably want to take some notes on that.
Here comes a new challenger.
Team Future Fight. If we got a team full of fantasy fighters, we need that team of sci-fi fighters to balance it out. So, let's bring back Team Future Fight. We'll bring back Jin, because thanks to his appearance in the Marvel games, and Devilot constantly popping up in other crossovers, I feel like Cyberbot still has a little bit of nostalgia behind it, so let's include him to bring those fans to this team. But for the other two spots, let's change things up a bit. In fact, I got an idea for this team. Let's give Team Future Fight a secret secondary theme. Because Cyberbots was a fighting game, but originally it was a beat-em-up. So, let's make this team dedicated to the futuristic Capcom beat-em-ups that were all over the place back in the 90s. And before anybody brings it up, yes, technically Jin was not in the original beat-em-up Armored Warriors. Instead, the pilot behind Blodio was this guy named Jeff Perkins, but Jin is still the face of the franchise. We're going to go with him, and we can just make Jeff Perkins an alternate skin for him. First up, if we're doing future-themed Capcom beat-em-ups, we gotta include Captain Commando. We talked about him earlier, but I'll just say it's wild that this guy was in only one beat-em-up game, and yet thanks to his appearance in the Marvel games, he still has that loyal fan base that is rooting for him to return to this day. And then for the final spot, I'm going with Yellow Iris from Battle Circuit. I'm picking her because A, she's got a pretty clear mechanical role in the team. In that game, she's got the power to make herself faster, so she's a pretty clear choice for a rushdown character. And because B, despite not being the main face of that game, she's definitely the only character from Battle Circuit to stick around, popping up in plenty of promotional material and even being planned for a few canceled crossover games. Plus, the actual face of that game, Cyber Blue, feels way too similar to Captain Commando for me. So maybe we could make him an alternate costume for Cap, but we should make the final team member someone who feels completely different.
Here comes a new challenger.
Team Maverick Hunters. If we really are bringing in characters from all over Capcom's history for this roster, then we need another Team Mega Man. And last time these guys showed up, we didn't have enough characters to give them their own squad, so we need to fix that now. Obviously, X and Zero will be in here, but now we have access to Axel, who... Okay, I actually have no idea how the Mega Man fanbase feels about Axel. He kind of had the hard luck of joining the series after the game started to go downhill, and I definitely remember hearing a lot of smack being talked about him back in the day, but I think now fans have some nostalgia for him. But whether they enjoy him or hate him, he, X, and Zero were all an established three-person team, which kind of makes him a shoo-in for this roster. Plus, Axel has the ability to copy the bodies of other robots, not take their abilities like X can. No, he can actually just flat-out transform into other robots. So, we could give him some morphing specials and supers where he transforms into enemies from the series for an attack, which would be a really unique mechanic for his moveset and would give all of his attacks some flair. It would give them something that would make them stand out and pop. Some real visual punch to go alongside all of his actual punches.
Here comes a new challenger.
Team Special Forces. Time to bring back another older team, but just like the rest of this roster, I'm no longer worrying about what characters are big or popular when this game is coming out, which opens us up to a lot of possibilities. I'm going to keep Cammy and Leon though, simply because they're two characters who are always going to be popular, and they feel the most connected to a team built around special agents. But for the third character, another Capcom blast from the past, Regina from Dino Crisis. If there is one series out there that I constantly see people saying needs to come back, it's Dino Crisis. Probably because Capcom actively mocks that fanbase with hints of a new game before pulling it away like Lucy with the football. Yeah, spoiler alert, but nobody from Exoprimal is going to be in this roster. Apologies to the dozen people still playing that game. Give her some moves like the classic Jill Valentine in Marvel, except instead of calling in zombies, she calls in dinosaurs. You know, a level 3 super where a T-Rex jumps into the ring would be something unforgettable. Also, if these KOF games have the special unlockable custom teams like the actual KOF games do, you know putting Regina and the Monster Hunter on a team together would form Team Dinosaur Hunter. And just hearing that name is all I need to justify her being in this roster.
Here comes a new challenger.
Team Night Warriors. Yes, we are once again going with Team Night Warriors because even if this series is as dead as its combatants, when there is a Capcom crossover, they deserve to come back. But you know what? I'm gonna get weird with this version of the team. We've seen them twice already today. I need to do something to spice them up before we're done. So you know what? I'm saying we don't use any of the characters I've already put on a Team Night Warriors. That's right. 3 completely new characters. This would be the KOF game in which you would remember, oh right, that was the time the Night Warriors team didn't have Morgan on it. Listen, I love Morgan, but sometimes she needs to sit out the crossover so that way other characters can get a chance to shine. Although, if you are sad to see Morgan go, don't worry, because we've got I Can't Believe It's Not Morgan coming right up. What I mean by that is I am basing this team around Darkstalkers 3. In that game, the big villain trying to destroy the universe was Jeddah, and he had 2 subordinates working under him. QB, the leader of a race of humanoid insects, and Lilith, a chunk of Morgan's soul given shape. Go watch our Darkstalkers retrospective if that last sentence was confusing to you, because that would be way quicker than me trying to explain it. So not only are these 3 a built-in 3-person team, but also they're a team full of not the mainstream characters, but 3 fan-favorite weird choices. And nothing gets players talking about a fighting game like a team full of characters that they wanted but they didn't expect. Which brings us to our final team, and for the final team, you need to go out big. And I can't think of a team much bigger than...
Here comes a new challenger!
Team Bosses. Okay, while I will admit I hate this name, it is a reference to when KOF 96 put together various boss characters from their fighting games onto one team, and that's a great idea that we should use at least once in our Capcom KOF. Just a group of villains who you know wouldn't trust each other, but for now, they're a force to be reckoned with, and it would be stunning to see all of them fighting together on the same team. Normally, it takes everything you have to take down one of these characters, and now you gotta beat 3 of them? Not only would this team get people talking, but they would also serve as the perfect mid-boss team right before the final boss. I figure M. Bison and Wesker are givens, they're easily 2 of Capcom's biggest villains. But for the 3rd spot, I was tempted to go with Sigma, but I can't see that guy teaming up with any humans, no matter how genetically enhanced they might be. So instead, I'm just going to go with the cool choice, Virgil. Yes, our team is the Demon, the Dictator, and the Disease. When you think of the Mount Rushmore of Capcom villains, they are way up there. Plus, I can actually see all 3 of them willing to work with each other for their own goals. Bison would want Umbrella's resources to build him a new superhuman body that he could put his psycho powers into. Wesker would want to study Virgil's demon DNA to create a new BOW, and Virgil would want Bison's psycho power because if there is one thing that Virgil is obsessed with, it's more power. So I could buy all 3 of them working together at first to try and get the others to give them what they want, but when the game is over and the credits start rolling, they would realize that's not happening, and it would lead to the inevitable betrayal that we all saw coming. And before anyone asks, wait, how can Virgil be on a team and V be on another team at the exact same time? Again, KOF, different timeline, we can change the rules around, it's fine. And there you have it, 13 teams that span the entire history of Capcom. We got the staples, we got the weird picks, we got the new choices, we got the classics, we got everything. Well, not everything. You see, King of Fighters 15 didn't just have a base roster, it also had DLC. 4 teams were added in Season 1, and then in Season 2 they add a bunch of individual characters, but I'm not going to worry about Season 2 because the whole challenge of today's episode was to come up with teams for Capcom characters, so we're only going to stick with the season that had teams. So we got 4 DLC teams, and I've already chosen so many of the staples you would expect to be in here. Time to get really weird. So let's dive into that DLC with Team Robot Masters. I've talked a lot in this video about how important Mega Man is to the history of Capcom, and whether or not Capcom employees believe that anymore, it's still true. So considering that this roster is the largest we've done so far, and it's getting DLC, I say we not only have a spot in the roster for a Mega Man team, let's create a DLC team for Mega Man villains. is what I was going to say until I realized, you know what, there aren't really a ton of Mega Man villains who keep popping up over and over again who would make sense to all put on a team. At least not ones who I could see entering into a fighting tournament. I mean, Dr. Wily has been one of Capcom's biggest villains for a while now. I can't exactly see the guy throwing down in the ring. But then I remembered, this is a crossover game. And what's the fun of a crossover game if you can't do some crossing over? So let's create Team Robot Masters and have it be dedicated to some of Capcom's biggest robotic villains. And before anybody points it out, yes, I am aware that I am including a bunch of robot villains on this team without actually using any of the Robot Masters. But the name was just too good, you all understand the point of the name, I'm keeping it. First up, we have to include Sigma. I don't even feel like I need to explain this one. If you were going with a robotic villain from Capcom's library, it has to be Sigma. Then let's include Street Fighter's own robo-baddie, Seth. Seth wasn't that popular when they popped up in Street Fighter 4, however, after Street Fighter 5, yeah, people now actually like this character. They're far more fun to control, they have a much better design, and with their ability in that game to steal other characters' moves, considering how big and crazy this roster is, that would be an amazing mechanic to put on a character. And for the final character, I know I am going to get some pushback on this one, but I gotta throw in Huitzel from Darkstalkers. Again, back in the day, they were the mid-boss in Darkstalkers, which was one of Capcom's biggest fighting game franchises back in the day, and they were well known for some of their crazy over-the-top animations, which would be amazing to see in a modern-day fighting game. However, I know some people are going to argue with this because Huitzel isn't actually a villain. They were designed to be one. They were designed to fly across space, land on other planets, wipe everyone out so that way they could prepare the planet for the coming of their Lord Pyron. However, Huitzel had something of an Iron Giant experience. They landed on Earth, lost the memories of their original programming, and even befriended a young boy and ended up becoming something of a good guy. But hey, Huitzel was one of many different robot servants for Pyron going across the galaxy to wipe out people, so we could just make this another one of his model numbers. Or we could have this be some story where Sigma comes back to the past, finds Huitzel, and then reactivates his original programming. Or, and much more likely, because it is the excuse we have gone to so many times now, King of Fighters is not set in the same continuity as the games it's crossing over. We could introduce Huitzel in this game, have him be a part of the bad guys team, then in the character endings, he has all of his programming wiped out, and then he becomes the good guy that we know from Darkstalkers. Bam, you got 3 robot bad guys in here, and you even got some character development in their arcade ending. What more could you ask for? I mean, other than a new Mega Man or Darkstalkers game, but that ain't happening. Team Fortune. Okay, I'll be honest with you. This is a grab bag team. I'm not even going to try and play it off like this is some brilliant plan. No, this is that team where I said, I got these remaining franchises that need to go somewhere. What link can I possibly find between them? I'm talking about Breath of Fire and Phoenix Wright. I could have squeezed Breath of Fire characters into Team Hunters since it is another fantasy-heavy team, but the best fit for that would have been Ryu, and sorry, but we already have a Ryu. And as for Phoenix Wright, this is not a series with a lot of fighters, at least not out of its main cast. Yes, I know Nick himself was in Marvel vs. Capcom, but that's a super fast, crazy, over-the-top air dasher. Those games tend to allow for goofier characters who don't fight in conventional ways. But you throw Nick into a tournament, and suddenly him sneezing on you and throwing papers in your face isn't as effective. But you know what? As crazy as it sounds, I could actually see Maya throwing down. Not well, I can't see her being a master martial artist, but I could see her flailing her arms around with some wacky slaps, tripping and falling into the enemy. Basically, she'd be like a semi-joke character where she's trying to fight, but she's just not very good at it. But she does have spiritual medium powers, so we could give her a few specials or supers where she calls out spirits to help her fight. Admittedly, that's not something that you can actually do in the Ace Attorney games, but again, different continuities, we can stretch the rules a little bit. And Maya does have the power to transform into the spirits of the dead, so we could make her big level 3 super her turn into an older Capcom character who can fight and let them do a big crazy combo. So we got Maya in here for Phoenix Wright, and for Breath of Fire, You know, one of the two recurring characters in that series is Nina, a magic user with wings on her back. So, we do have another young girl with magical and spiritual powers. And considering that every Breath of Fire game has a different version of Nina from a completely different time period in there, I could see at least one of those incarnations of Nina gain along with Maya. So okay, as weird of a pairing as those two are, I can see them being on a team together, so we do have a theme forming here. Is there a third spiritual or magically powered girl around Maya and Nina's age who has a more serious side to match Nina, but also a goofy side to match Maya? Also maybe came from a fighting game to help make for an easy transition? Hey, Minot! One of the best new characters to get added to Street Fighter V. Sure, throw her in there, I can totally see the three of them hanging out. And their powers are all just close enough to each other that I can see some kind of a connection. They could all have some kind of a spiritual link in their powers. Again, with Nina, we're stretching it a little bit, but we could make it work. And you know what, sometimes if you just want to get a bunch of fan-favorite characters together on a team-based fighting game, yeah, you're gonna have to stretch a little bit. That's just the way things are. But I still think that this would make for an interesting combination that would have a lot of people excited. You know, it just occurred to me while I was recording this, I think I accidentally just created Team Capcom Magical Girl. This is like 60% of Sailor Scout team in the making. Is it too late to change the name? Team Treasure Hunters. I told you the DLC teams were going to get weird, and even after that last team, I'm still not done coming up with weird combinations. So we only got 2 spots left in here, so I'm going to dig deep on this next one. And what do you dig deep for? Treasure! I did not have that joke in mind when I started writing this since I just started typing and it came out, and it's too late to change it now. I wanted to find something specific that could bring some characters together, and I realized, okay, Ruby Hart from the Versus game. She's a pirate, she's a treasure hunter, maybe we could throw Zack and Wiki in here to form Team Pirates? No. Only like 5 people remember Zack and Wiki. 5 very smart and talented people, but 5 people nonetheless. But then I remembered, hey, what about Power Stone? Another beloved but forgotten Capcom franchise, and it was all about hunting down mystical jewels, digging through ancient temples, and traveling the world in search of these stones. So let's throw in there Edward Falcon from Power Stone. And lastly, we need a deep cut. One of those cuts that even the people cheering on Edward Falcon will stop and ask, who? And what character can get people to ask that question better than a character who doesn't even have a name? If I'm not making sense anymore, it's probably because this video has been going on for twice as long as I expected it to. You see, back in the 90s, Capcom made a beat-em-up game for Dungeons & Dragons, and it introduced multiple characters based around various D&D jobs. And these character designs were amazing and stuck with players for years, and arguably the most memorable of these characters was the Thief, also known as Maria. So, you know what? Let's bring her back. Or sort of bring her back. I know someone is shouting right now, but Dungeons & Dragons owns that game. Even if Capcom can produce it, they can't use the characters whenever they want. True, which is why I said we would sort of bring her back. We wouldn't be able to use the name Maria, but she is almost entirely referred to as the Thief, and you can't just copyright random nouns. So let's take this character, give her an updated design that makes her look just different enough that we can call her a brand new character, but still remind everyone that, yeah, this is basically just the Thief. And then we could give her a brand new name, but it could be a name like something the Thief. And everyone could just keep referring to her as the Thief. They'll technically be a brand new character, but all the old Capcom fans will know what we did. Think of it like an Easter egg. The best kind of Easter egg. The legally distinct kind. And now, after all this time, we finally come to the final team. Your final installment for this roster is Team Clover. Our final team is Jean from God Hand, Beautiful Joe, and Amaterasu from Okami. And out of all the teams we've talked about today, if this game actually ever got made, this is the one that would be least likely to happen, and yet it's the one I can almost guarantee would make people the most happy. There's no story reason for why this team would exist, there's no character synergy between them. No, this is all motivated by behind-the-scenes stuff. For anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, back in 2004, Capcom founded a brand new studio, Clover, with Shinji Mikami leading the whole project. They gave them tons of freedom to explore and come up with really unique ideas, leading to the super colorful and explosive Beautiful Joe, the underrated classic beat-em-up God Hand, and the gorgeous, magical Okami. And then the studio shut down, because despite pumping out one massive fan favorite after another, none of these games really sold all that well. However, to this day, these games are still cult classics. Even God Hand, which was the least successful out of the three, has people that will jump through your window if it means getting to talk to someone about Gene and his wacky glowing punches. So, while the idea of making a Team Clover is way too specific for the main roster, it being so laser focused on a very specific audience is what would make it a perfect DLC team. This is a team that won't bring in a ton of players, but it will definitely bring in those specific players. And there you have it, everyone. In honor of the 4-year anniversary of this show, we did 4 rosters spanning Capcom's entire history. From Street Fighters to super fighting robots, from dinosaurs to demons, commandos of both the Captain and Bionic variety. But this wasn't just a tribute to Capcom. It was also a salute to KOF, because I have always loved the idea of a team-based fighting game. Not just for mechanical reasons, because it encourages you to try a wider variety of characters, but also because it forces you to think of what combinations you could come up with. Sure, some of them are going to be basic, there's always going to be those standard teams that you have to include, but it still gives the developers an opportunity to get so creative. You have to work to come up with some really interesting combinations, which leads to characters getting included who would never have made it into a fighting game otherwise. In fact, give it a try yourself. Think about Capcom's entire history and come up with a roster where everyone has to fit into 3-person teams. Go ahead and have fun with it. As I said, this is our anniversary episode. We've been doing this for 4 years now, and over that time, I have seen so many people getting inspired to put together their own rosters. I've seen little communities sprouting up around this idea. Heck, I even had one person tell me that they started up a club at their school all around building rosters for fighting games inspired by this show. And that is crazy to me. It is wild thinking that this weird little idea for a show that I came up with has gotten so many people following and supporting it, and it really does mean a lot to me. And if this is your first time checking out this show and you like what you saw, then make sure that you hit that subscribe button and ring that bell. I know I mentioned it at the start, but I'm going to repeat myself. This is the year of 100,000 subs. We're going to try and hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And I promise you, I am going to push hard to make that happen. So help us out just simply by clicking that button and ringing that bell. And of course, if you've already subscribed, then you can give us a thumbs up and leave a comment down there. Both of those things tell YouTube to spread these videos around. And if you want even more content from us, then you can sign up for our Patreon like the fine folks whose names you're seeing going across the screen now. Over there, you get bonuses like early looks at videos and commentary tracks on builder rosters. So if that sounds interesting to you, then go ahead and give it a look. But if you don't want to sign up, then hey, I still appreciate you hanging out with us today. And if you want more from me, you can always find me around the web on Blue Sky, on Twitch, on Twitter. I'm on pretty much everything. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and for supporting us for the past 4 years. Stay safe out there, and come back next time.